Hello and welcome to Something's Off with Andrew Heaton. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton. And the program is brought to you by the Seeing Eye Horse Foundation. The Seeing Eye Horse Foundation is a 401c3k PFT nonprofit organization which breeds and raises ponies to become guides for blind people so that they can have full and autonomous lives and also horses. Many of us take for granted the ease with which we navigate through life using good vision. Absent sight, otherwise simple tasks like walking down Main Street or going grocery shopping become far more difficult. The Seeing Eye Horses are trained to notice when crosswalks are safe for pedestrians and a variety of other tasks. From buying groceries to purchasing a new pair of slacks at Macy's department store, a Seeing Eye Horse can be the best tool and friend someone with a sight disability can have. Seeing Eye Horses allow blind people to regain autonomy and dignity by doing things like maneuvering through a mall, playing frisbee, or going swimming down in the municipal pool. The Seeing Eye Horse Foundation. Make your guide a clopper. And now it's time for another How-To with Heaton. Today, how to cook a lobster. I'm prompted to discuss this story by none other than Martha Stewart, who stumbled onto some media attention recently when she did a Facebook Live with Jennifer Gardner. She told Jennifer that she likes to toss in a shot of vodka or tequila into the boiling pot before she plops in those lobsters. Then, she said,
I give them a drink.
Why?
Well, if you were going to be boiled alive, wouldn't you like to have a drink first?
You're right, Martha.
Right,
always.
so I'm humane.
Now, I frankly think it's unfair to tarnish Martha on this one. A lot of people are saying it's dark. Okay, it's a little morbid, but she's right. It can't be worse to toss in a shot of vodka to a pot you're about to boil a living creature in. In fact, I do one better. I like to give my lobster a little cigarette he can smoke before I cook him. Generally, you'll have to hand-roll your lobster cigarettes. In my experience, the people down at the gas station look at you funny if you ask for lobster cigarettes, even though they sell little glass tubes for people to take roses out of, which they use as crack pipes. That's true. You can look that up. You walk into a gas station and you say, hey, I'd like to buy some small, tacky roses and a lighter. That's fine. They're fine with that. But if you ask for lobster cigarettes, you're some kind of weirdo. So anyway, you can just hand-roll a little bit of tobacco, light it, and hand it to that doomed crustacean. You might think it's hard to get a lobster to smoke. And it would be if all you did was hand it the cigarette. I haven't listened to any Jordan Peterson, but I think he said lobsters are really affected by peer pressure. So what you need to do is get 3 or 4 lobsters who already smoke, give them cigarettes, then offer it to the lobster you intend to cook. 9 out of 10 times, that lobster's going to light up to seem cool to his new buddies. At this point, I like to toss a shot of vodka into a boiling pot, just like Martha Stewart, then I kill that lobster. I quickly and humanely kill that lobster using a sledgehammer. It seems inhumane to me to boil anything alive, particularly after I've offered it tobacco products, which is why I recommend everyone have a hammer for their toolbox and a kitchen hammer. And that's how you cook a lobster. My guest today is Stu Burguiere of the News and Why It Matters and the Glenn Beck program, and we are going to talk about the FDA. Now, I know the most important thing that we could be talking about is whatever angry thing happened in the news cycle. I know that that's important. However, occasionally, I do want to dip into policy, and I want to dip into policy for this reason. The head of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, Scott Gottlieb, is leaving. He has resigned his commission, or he's given up his commissionership, I think at the end of the month. And I want Stu Burguiere to become the new head of the FDA. That is my goal. Basically, I tricked Stu into coming here. I'm trying to get him to throw his hat in the ring. I think he'd be good at it. And before we go down the rabbit hole of why I think Stu would be good at this, I want to make a general preface to this. Stu and I are both going to be, I think, fairly skeptical of the efficacy of the Food and Drug Administration. And if you're at home and that sounds absolutely nuts to you, if you're one of the people that listens to my podcast that has a Milton Friedman bobblehead on your refrigerator, this is going to we're just playing the greatest hits, my friends. But if you're unfamiliar with this concept, come in here with an open mind. And I'm going to give you a thought experiment that might ease this a little bit. Imagine if there were presently a federal Department of Shoes, And I came around and went, I don't think we need that federal Department of Shoes anymore. A lot of people would go, you're a heartless monster. Why shouldn't people have shoes? And I'd go, I think we could figure it out on our own. I think it might. Did you guys notice how we have way more left shoes than right shoes because the shoe department keeps screwing things up? The FDA could be something like that. And so bear with us as we go down this rabbit hole. So Stu, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
When you become head of the FDA, what are you going to do?
Well, I hopefully shut it down mainly. It's interesting because I think this actually, you mentioned it's not about the most outrageous thing of the day, this particular interview. And one of the things I did, for my show, Wonderful World of Stu, was talk about the FDA. And it was based on the outrage of the day, which at that point, remember these days, Republicans were calling for expenses and government spending to be cut. I don't know if you remember,
they were still pretending to care about that stuff?
They were pretending to care about it.
Yeah, I miss those glory days when they'd still talk about that and pretend they were going to do things.
Yeah. When Barack Obama was office, this is the thing Republicans would say occasionally.
Reagan proved the deficits don't matter, Stu. At least, it only operates depending on what party's in power. Yeah,
it's true. So I think it was Bill Maher who was mocking Republicans and libertarians for wanting government that was too small. And he was going through several examples of the ridiculous ideas that could come of such of something. I think it was about the sequester. Remember the sequester?
Oh, right.
It was cut 1% of spending, 2% of spending across the board. Like this was,
the
Nancy
cupboards
Pelosi,
are bare.
Yeah,
they're bare.
That's what she said. Nancy Pelosi said exactly that. The covers are bare. There's no crumbs left. And so he said one of his examples, like, "Oh, what do we need government for? You could just, we don't need the FDA to inspect your meat. You can smell your own meat." And that was a huge laugh line for the audience because it proved, of course we need government.
This is so ridiculous
for these basic things. And so when you actually stop and think about it, and this was even further than I even realized at the time, but the FDA does almost nothing to inspect the food you eat. In fact, you will likely go your entire life without eating one thing that was even visually inspected by someone from the FDA.
So is it like a lottery program where they they show up and they're like, okay, like Domino's, you get it today.
Right. So I think it is, it's been a while on these numbers, but I think these are approximate. So it's about 6% of food producers in the United States will get inspected in a given year. So 94% of places that make food for you don't even get inspected at any point in the year. Now, the 6% that do get inspected don't get inspected every day. They get inspected on, let's say, one day of the year. So all the other days, they don't get inspected.
And I'm not really great at math, so this would be something like 365 times points. Okay, all right. It's a fractional. It's not a real likely scenario. Okay.
It's very, very small.
I couldn't even finish that equation. I couldn't even finish the fake equation. I was so exhausted.
You got into math comedy.
I just pictured an X in my head. Went, I'm done with this.
Yeah, no, it's smart. So then, of course, that's just U.S. suppliers. About 2/3 of fruits and vegetables come from overseas. 3/4 of seafood comes from overseas. And legitimately, when you round, you get to the FDA inspects 0% of foreign food producers. 0%.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I would feel that would make. I mean, I don't know all of the deep dive in this. That seems to me to make slightly more sense actually if it's coming from another source.
Because it doesn't necessarily have our standards or whatever. But that's just there's so many of them. I mean, when they do some inspections, but the amount is incredibly minimal. Now, when you get to that, I think you have an idea. If you go and pick a random piece of food out of your refrigerator right now, and you look at it, there is a better chance of you winning Powerball than someone actually even visually inspected the food you're looking at from the FDA.
Okay, so
they're not doing anything for the food supply.
See, and so this is the difference between when you finish up your 2-year reign of the FDA, and then I become the head of the FDA, which is how that works. So this is what I'm going to do it slightly different.
Okay.
You would abolish all of it. I would just gut it, but maintain a kind of veneer.
Right.
Because I do think I think that it is largely a feel-good operation. It makes people feel safe and feel good. While not really doing a lot. And in fact, we'll get into it in a minute. I think it actually does a lot of harmful things as well. So I would defund a significant portion of it. I don't mind government agencies that are collecting data and statistics, so long as it's if we're not getting excessive with it. But if they're tabulating things, I could see a role for them. But the overall the slowing down pharmaceuticals and things like that. A lot of the regulations they have, I would lift. Kind of like the Department of Education, I wouldn't abolish it. It would just do statistics. That's all it would do. It would just crunch numbers.
And I don't know, you need a whole department to get a couple Excel sheets going, but I mean, I understand what you're saying.
But again, this way no one panics.
Right. Well, that's I think the problem, though. The larger problem here is...
In fact, I would double the size of the building. This is what I would do. All of my press conferences would be me going, we're building a larger building here, except we'd have like ball pits and stuff, because I basically run it like Google. And then they'd look at it and they're like, wait a minute, he's gutted half of it. He's using a quarter of the funding just to build a larger building because he wants to have a shark. I would be really, this is now a good Netflix series, yeah.
You're just going to write, you're going to well, you have 2 years to do this.
Yeah.
And you'll need to build it up from where I leave it, because I think this is actually what you're describing is completely accurate and also a real part of the problem, which is people think and they get this sort of ease from government is there to protect me, even when it's not. So yes, you're right. People probably would panic. I mean, Bill Maher looked at it as if, I think in Bill Maher's head,
this is the one stopgap between us and dying in that novel or that book about Into the Jungle or whatever. From the one we have to read in high school. We don't read it. We hear about it. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
Sure, that one book you're talking about from the jungle.
I'm really bringing it in today, Stu. I clearly got enough sleep for this show.
You're trying to do physics equations. This is not the right way to go. But like in his mind,
Sinclair.
every steak.
Sinclair wrote that.
Good job.
Up to Sinclair.
Every time he had a steak, someone of the FDA had like tested it. In his mind, that's what I think he thought the reality is. And the reality is actually what he's describing is an incredible testament to the power of the free market. All the inspections that go on, with the exception of the few that I mentioned, go on between private companies who are investigating or doing checks on other private companies. And yet eating food in the United States is one of the safest things you will ever do in your entire life. The chances of you, I want to say, if the FDA describes it, if they started checking every place now, or every place at the year 0, they would just be finishing checking for the first time each food producer in the United States. That's how
based
many
on their current
that's
output,
the pace. That's the pace they would have to go. So the entire 2019 years of checking every place every day, they would eventually get all of them by about now.
Okay.
So I mean, that's how difficult of a job this is. You simply can't do it. Only the free market can do something like this. And
it does a pretty good job. Like
an incredible job.
The issue that I have hitherto taken with my libertarian friends when they're just like, well, you don't want to kill your customers, and I'm like, I don't want to use death as the market tool. However, like when Chipotle had food poisoning, their stock dropped by like 50%.
Yep.
And they you can let's assume that I don't know, but let's assume the Chipotle people are just heartless monsters.
I don't think they are.
Yeah, I doubt it. But all the same, a 50% stock drop, they don't want to do that. And in fact, they have standards in practice now that are above and beyond the FDA's. So they're exceeding whatever level of government regulation is by law required because they don't want to lose that money.
Yeah, and I think people are generally good. I think there have been, of course, cases where we've seen companies. Everyone will bring up cigarettes being tobacco being the ugliest one there, and there were people there who were doing things that were very wrong, and we know that now. And this happens. They're not the only company. There are people who do horrible things all the time. Though generally speaking, I think people are good. They want to kill or hurt or make sick their own customers, and so people will, I think, generally try to do a good job. People don't want to think of themselves as these evil monsters, right? They want to believe, right? Sometimes people believe the wrong things. I mean,
and I think they're afraid of getting sued. I think there's both things. There's a carrot and a stick approach going on.
Yeah, I think so as well. And let me give you these stats real quick. This is eating in the United States.
Okay.
You will get mildly sick, like a tummy ache, right? Out of every 6,570 meals in the United States.
Okay.
Now that's in your lifetime, though. That's so probably at some point in your life. I mean, I eat about.
I already got that out of the way.
Right, exactly.
Excellent. I'm done.
There you go.
Fantastic.
You'll get seriously ill, like go to the hospital every 2.45 million meals. Okay, in the United States, and you will die. One out of every 104.8 million meals.
All right, come at me, food. I'm pretty sure a jealous lover will get me before you do.
Exactly. In fact, you're far more likely to
die by a jealous lover.
Right, die by a jealous lover, or get in a car crash and die on the way to the grocery store, or you're actually 50% more likely to choke on the food that is healthy than die from unhealthy food. So this is like the lowest possible risk activity you can have. Again, much less risky than driving to work today.
See,
especially in your state, because you can't even form sentences.
Exactly. That's yes.
Wait, what?
So I looked at the CDC's info, and what I thought was interesting was the statistics that I read, at least I think these are from 2019, maybe 2018. So every year, 1 in 6 Americans get sick. 48 million people get food sickness. 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die of foodborne diseases. And I looked at that, and I think it's very helpful to have kind of mental exercises that you put your political viewpoints through to see if they hold the rigor test, right?
Sure.
So I looked at that and I went, okay, let's say that Stu Burguiere became the head of the FDA, and that were the current situation. There's no FDA, and we had that current thing. I think people would be screaming about, my God, like 3,000 people die a year because Stu Burguiere got rid of the FDA. Like we should have government step up.
That would be the blame, right?
But I look at it, I'm like, well, but that is the system right now with it. So does that mean that it's doing much? And my guess is no. I think it's mostly cosmetic. I think, and you're probably going to have some amount of that regardless. I don't think you're ever going to get that down to zero.
No, well, of course not, right? I mean, it's completely impossible.
Yeah,
we know
Denny's.
And I eat at Denny's.
Yeah.
I always think about you want to go a testament to how good our system is. And not everything in the free market, I think, works as well as food does. I mean, it really does work amazingly well. But I mean, one of the most famous examples of food at a restaurant being tainted is Jack in the Box from, what was it, the 80s, where in the West Coast they had some egg issues and there's some salmonella issues, and several people died because of it. It was a very it was a big thing. Jack in the Box almost went out of business. It took a long time for them to come back. And I thought of that the other day when I was sitting with my 2 young children in a Jack in the Box that I chose to bring them to. Like, this is a company literally famous for killing customers. And I'm so confident in the free market that here I am with my 2 young children actually feeding them this stuff. And of course, eating it myself.
So you were willing to eat there even during the government shutdown.
Yes.
You did not think that that was also kind of a weird thing where people were really panicking about that. And they're like, and it's like, guys, the fact that no one's dropping dead right now would indicate that these measures are perhaps not as intense as you think they are.
Yeah.
My food story, which doesn't even have to do with food poisoning, just reminded me. I was in Tishomingo, Oklahoma, and I went to the only non-chain drive-through taco store I've ever been to. And I went in, and there were clearly bullet holes in the window. Oh. And I was like, hey, what are those bullet holes about, friends? And they're like, Stacy's ex-husband took some shots. And I was like, and he is now in prison?
Yeah,
and they went, where is Brett? And I was like, no one. But I didn't get sick. I'll transition a little bit over because we're focusing on the food, but actually some of the stuff that I think we should talk about is the pharmaceutical side of it. So I see a point. I don't want to have spurious pharmaceutical products on the market. Nobody does. Although I don't think that herbal supplements are regulated by the FDA, if I'm not mistaken.
That's why they have those long disclaimers, like 9 seconds of commercial and then 51 seconds of disclaimers about how the FDA has never said anything about this particular product that's positive.
But if we're building our case of the redundancy of the FDA, which so far is what we've basically said is that what you've described is the low statistical likelihood that your food's actually been inspected, and therefore perhaps it's just feel good, right?
You live your life basically without the assistance of the FDA when it comes to your food, and that's a great testament and a wonderful thing. You should be excited about that. The fact that they're not looking at your food and it's still coming out this well is something you should be encouraged about when it comes to capitalism.
But I'm going to take a step further and say that I think it does cost lives. And I say this because whenever you see an announcement from the FDA that says, we've just approved a new medication that's going to save 10,000 lives a year, and it only took 8 years of testing, FDA testing. I'm like, so I'm not great at math here, but would that be 80,000 people that died during that period that could have had it? I think Milton Friedman was very good at assessing the kind of psychological impact going on if the head of the FDA or just an inspector in the FDA is in charge of approving a medication. You're going to get zero credit if the medication helps people. And I don't mean to indicate that these are all like self-interested monsters, but there is some kind of subconscious equation going on in your mind of, okay, if this goes well, terrific. If this goes poorly, I'm going to get pulled in front of Congress and screamed at and fired, and people are going to charge me with murdering people. It is you have a far more risk-averse mindset by virtue of the situation that you're placed in, which shouldn't be surprising to anybody. The problem with that is that risk aversion does delay the time it takes for medication to be made, particularly life-saving medication, and it also raises the cost of it because the longer the trials go on, the higher the percentage of the funding that just goes to the red tape rather than the actual research. The stats that I have are that I think to get a new medication out on the markets, somewhere between $200 and $800 million to get a new medication out there. So it's already very expensive to make it. And about 30% of that is FDA red tape. So a significant portion of that is. But the main thing is that it is, by virtue of delaying it, you are also delaying the impact on people's lives. We have got around that to some extent where we're tinkering around with right-to-try laws, which I think are a very good idea. And they're a way of circumnavigating that. But it is just, when we're getting into this, it's like, let's at least acknowledge that the system is designed to be a risk-averse, slow system. And so you are trading, ideally the best trade in this scenario is a dichotomy between speed and safety.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, a lot of people will kind of go after big pharma. That's a big
it's an easy one to hit.
It's an easy one to hit, and I think even a lot of people on the right go after them as sort of this evil villain, group of villains. I think of them as like fantastic. Like I love big pharma. If we're gonna screw with companies, can we not screw with the people making grandma's cancer medication? Is that possible? Can we pick any other villain in the world other than that? Because you're right. You go through these things. I always use this example of Fenphen. Do you remember Fenphen?
Oh, wasn't that the really fad diet thing that caused birth defects?
There we go. Perfect.
Did
I would say that's how most people think of it.
My mememory finally worked today. I remember that.
I will say you're in the general vicinity of what's happening. Basically, it was Wyeth, the company, the drug company at the time, that came out with this group, and it was a combination of a couple medications, and it was for weight loss. It was a weight loss drug. It was a combination of drugs called Fenphen, and so the idea was it would help curb your appetite, and it was working. They had had millions and millions and millions of people had taken it, and so a scientific study came out that it was a group of 24 people, and whatever it was above the normal amount that would create it was a heart arrhythmia. I'm trying to think. It's been a little while since I've done this, so you have to go back and look at some of the exact medical conditions. The bottom line was it showed that there were problems. So immediately the FDA kind of stepped in and pulled the drug off the market, and Wyeth got sued like crazy. The real interesting part I think about that story is that Wyeth's reaction to it, which was, holy crap, we admit all wrong and create this multi-billion-dollar fund, and people just, you want to talk about a great story of scams. People were, lawyers were getting, echocardiograms. They were hiring people to do echocardiograms for law firms to get into this firm, because once you could prove that you had this issue, even if you couldn't prove you had never even taken the drugs, they were just doing payoffs to get this off of
you looked at someone funny and they'd taken Fenphen and maybe you got a thing from that and now I get some money?
It was amazing. People were creating doctors that didn't exist, and they were submitting claims from times that the drugs weren't even out. It became a lottery for people to. It was every commercial on TV. Have you taken this drug? Do you have heart problems? And they would just solicit, advertise, and they would have days where they would set up in hotel rooms and advertise for people to come in and just get echocardiograms constantly, because you didn't have to prove you took the drug. You just had to prove you had this issue. It was crazy, and they handled it very poorly, particularly for their stockholders. But what I found interesting about it was there is very little. It is that same approach where they looked at this and said, well, some percentage, and it was a slightly elevated percentage of people would get this particular heart issue. But they never stopped to think about how many people it helped. How many people, obesity obviously is an issue in the United States of America. If this would have helped, 5 or 10% of people who took it to avoid those types of issues, overwhelmingly, I think they went through and did a study, and it was something to the effect of like 20 or 30 to 1 the amount of people it would help as opposed to the people that it would hurt. But because of the 1% of people that it would hurt, that became the narrative.
So I want to make sure I understand this. You're kind of outlining a sort of utilitarian metric by which to judge this. And with Fenphen, there was a small percentage of people that had heart side effects that were deleterious, but for a larger percentage, there were people that were helped.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you could argue this multiple ways. A lot of people said, well, it's not worth the risk, or maybe they weren't clear enough in the risk, or they didn't know about it at the time and they took it off the market. Again, I think it has a lot to do with the idea of, I'm a big advocate of like the number one thing we can do in all of journalism right now, and this is not, I talk about politics and political news all day and all that stuff. It is not politics news, it is health news. And it is, I want every single time a story comes out about a new study that have the hierarchy of scientific study next to it and show me where on that scale it is. Is it a cohort study? Is it a observational study? Because people just take all of these things as if they're fact, right? Like,
and media reporting of health stuff tends to be atrocious.
It's way worse than political because there's no one on the other side to fight it.
No, I read a book on it because at the time I was working for Fox Business and felt a sort of intellectual responsibility to know what we were doing, and got a couple of things pulled, which I was very pleased with, because you get these sort of journalists get these kind of clickbaity headline type things. Yeah. Like the one that came out, I think, right when I started working at Fox Business was that if you eat meat, you are twice as likely to get colon rectal cancer, and that was like that dominated the cycle. It was like, you're like, wow, twice as likely, wow, but you actually look at it and it's like, okay, you're basically 1 out of 1,000 people are going to get colon rectal cancer that are vegetarian. 2 out of 1,000 people will get colon rectal cancer. So it's like, your chances have gone from nothing to nothing plus 0.1.
Right. And that's much more important informationally to an average person, the absolute risk rather than the relative risk.
Right. And we think in terms of relative. We're not very good at absolute stuff.
Oh, my gosh.
Twice. Oh, my gosh. The shark's 2 times as big?
Exactly. I mean, you would exactly. I mean, I think most people would say like I have a chance to, I'm having major health problems. I'm very overweight and I have a chance to lose weight. But there is a 0.5% chance more that you might get a particular heart thing. What's your opinion on the cost benefit analysis of that? And I think most people would look at that and say, well, okay, let me give it a shot. Or they might. They at least have the chance. And now the FDA's taken that off the market. I would highly recommend to you, if you haven't read it, The Bad Food Bible by Dr. Aaron Carroll.
No. Would that tell me what I'm currently eating that might give me cancer? Because I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh, this is even better. He will tell you the things that you're eating that won't give you cancer, that everyone tells you will give you cancer. And that's why it makes life fun. I love the book because it's just a sober review of the science, right? It's just saying, okay, well, here's what you hear. Gluten-free will do this, and salt will do this, and alcohol will do this, and meat will do this. Again, I'm a vegetarian. He goes through all the science on meat, which is very positive for people who eat meat. Alcohol is another one. Like the science on alcohol is actually, like, it looks moderate alcohol use. The science overall seems to point to it's actually probably beneficial.
See, to your health. I'm going to take issue with that.
Sure.
As a fairly frequent social drinker.
Yes.
Like when you get into the statistics there too, I've looked into them because for years it was like moderate drinking. Well, the two things. Do you remember the whole resveratrol thing where this happened maybe 5 years ago where we basically went, hey, the French are less fat than us.
Right.
Why is that? They eat a bunch of goose. That should make them fat.
Right.
And then so somebody went, it's because they drink a lot of red wine.
Right.
And then red wine, because it has resveratrol in it, became the clearly that, if you drink resveratrol, you're going to live forever. And I looked at that and went, so let me get this straight. People that drink red wine live longer than people that drink, say, plastic jug vodka.
Right.
I am not surprised by this.
No.
I suspect there could even be some correlations there of who goes to a gym. The guy buying an $80 bottle of Merlot wouldn't surprise me if he has health care.
I
looked at that, and then the other statistic that I think is misleading, because this is people, social drinkers like myself, enjoy telling ourselves this to make us feel better. But the moderate drinkers live longer than teetotalers, according to most studies. But the problem with that is that the teetotalers include recovering alcoholics who oftentimes have already shot their liver or take up smoking as soon as they're done with alcohol. So if you were to basically compare it between social drinkers like myself and Mormons, they're probably going to live longer than me.
Possibly. Mormons do a lot of things very healthy. So I would say that you would not be disappointed in the rigor used in this book. This is not Pinterest.
What
science.
I'm hearing is I should drink more.
Yes,
and eat more cheese.
No, I would say that he addresses a lot of these, and in fact, I would say the book is dedicated to taking claims like that and showing you why they're not true, right? So it's not
Okay.
He's not like a guy saying, well, there's this one study. His point is you need to look at how thorough are these? How much is the preponderance of evidence? It's not just one thing. There was a study that came out that said people who drink diet soda actually consume more calories. Now, in theory, my point on this, first of all, and I'm America's largest diet soda connoisseur.
You are
and
this is not hyperbolic.
Yes.
You have like a museum in your house, and
this is basically the only issue I'm passionate about. Is artificial sweeteners.
This is your whole job is just to purchase diet soda from weird like you tweeted the other day. I was looking at your Twitter feed, Stu, and you had you were ranking like the newest diet soda flavors and things.
There's six new Diet Coke flavors, and I can go through that later if you'd like. But the study basically said, now to me that would say personal responsibility. If there's 0 calories in diet soda, and you consume more calories because you're drinking diet soda, that's not diet soda's fault. Like, that's your fault if you think to yourself, well, then I can just eat everything I want, right? Because I'm drinking diet soda, I'll be thinner. And so I don't blame diet soda for that, even if it were true. But I did something that I don't think anyone else in all of health media decided to go through. Not that I'm in health media. I actually, got the study and read it. And when you read the study, it doesn't say that at all. At no point in the study does it say that people who drink diet soda consume more calories. What it says is basically, to summarize it, is, let's say you're a typical person, eats 2,000 calories and drinks 700 calories. And if someone on diet soda drinks 0 calories, but eats like 2,100 calories.
Yeah, that's kind of like when I first started jogging, I would come home and eat a pizza, like a whole pizza. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not sure I jogged a whole pizza worth.
So someone who drinks diet soda winds up eating about 100 calories more than the person who doesn't, but consumes way less. In fact, less than people who just drank water. The study itself said people who drink diet soda consume less calories than people who drink water, and yet they were promoting it as bad for diet soda. That's how horrible the health media can be. It's a great headline.
I think you've made a good point. There's very little pushback.
There's no pushback, and that's my point with politics is like you have a Republican Party, you have a Democratic Party. So Democrats make a point that is not supported. Republicans will blab about it.
Trump says he likes the color purple, everyone hates
purple, and everyone on the right loves purple for a while.
You see a lot of purple T-shirts, a lot of green T-shirts.
No one's like me. There's not enough me, Andrew. That's the problem in this world. There's not enough people who sit back and be like, you know what? There's a problem with that diet soda study, and I'm going to find it. And I think that's a real problem when it comes to this. The FDA is a great, I think, when coming back to that a little bit, is a great way to kind of encapsulate that whole world, because people are so convinced that the government's there to help them. And this is why I have to say, I don't like your solution as the FDA.
Okay.
Head of the FDA.
So
there's going to be a controversy here.
My desire to not make ripples might actually just be perpetuating a bad system.
Well, I think that is a little bit of a problem with your approach here, because it's making people believe the government is there for them, and even though it isn't. And I like yours better than the current approach. There's no doubt about it.
So here's what I'll do. I'll defund most of it, build that ball pit, and then shut her down like the day before I leave.
Okay. Well, then the next person might just do it, though. Well, I guess if it's completely shut, as long as you can get it completely shut down before you leave office.
Okay, right.
That's what I would like, and you can open it up to just a fun.
But unpack this. The basic idea you have is that it's because it's serving a kind of cognitive trick to make you have a false sense of security.
People wind up becoming reliant on it. I mean, I think honestly, if you asked, I bet it's 90% of the American people who believe that the food that they're eating is regularly inspected by the FDA, and so that they are thinking that, you know what, thank God the government's here, or I would die. And that is a dangerous precedent to get in people's minds, because they start thinking about everything. They think about guns. They think, well, if the government wasn't there, then I would be getting shot. And it's, well, no, the government basically isn't there, right, when it comes to guns. We have a Second Amendment that guarantees they won't get there. Most of the time, occasionally it's listened to. And the idea that these guns are out there and able to be purchased, people look at that as so crazy. But step back for a moment and think, there are 300, 400 million guns in this country, and your chances of getting one of them used against you are incredibly low. I mean, you're almost guaranteed to go through your entire life not being in a mass shooting. That doesn't mean when a mass shooting happens, it's not a big deal. Of course it is, and we want to minimize those things. But the government isn't really doing anything right, to protect you against that. You can walk into most places. If you decided you want to have a gun and go shoot up a place, you're going to be able to do it almost all over the place. And the idea that the government has a gun-free zone, at least half the country thinks, well, at least I'm protected. There can't be any guns in there.
Yeah, by law.
Yeah, and it creates a false sense of security that the government is there to protect you. So when something does go wrong, everybody's answer is, well, if the government just did a little bit more and they helped me a little bit more on that protection, then I'd be okay.
I think that there's a deep psychological divide, which I think is losing ground in a bad way, in my opinion, where round about the time of the Enlightenment, the previous thought process had always been you need to have a leader running everything. And that, like we're going to have like an Arthurian style king, and he's going to have a feudal oligarchy running stuff, but you need him running stuff, right? And then kind of in the Enlightenment, some folks went, actually, no, I think we can handle this. Handle it on. I don't think we need this. And it worked really well and brought incredible, unfathomed prosperity to the entire planet. And then on the swing side of things, you have like the extreme variants of control freak mindset in Soviet Russia, where you have, literally a commissar of shoes and that sort of thing. But there is this sort of idea of if something's important, there has to be someone in charge of it. And I get the psychology behind it. I understand why that feels right. But a lot of the time, it ends up being deleterious. We didn't even get into the concept of regulatory capture, which is something that the FDA has a checkered history with, or if there are just outright malfeasance going on. There were a lot of gay people who were not the fan of the FDA during the 70s and 80s, or during the 80s, because they were taking so long with HIV medication and things like that, and there were some questions going on there. Yeah, a lot of the time, things don't work better with some person with a bullhorn yelling at everybody of how it's going to work, and it can actually go the other way. Before we wrap up, I do want to do kind of due diligence to do a couple of devil's advocate scenarios with you.
Sure.
So if there's no FDA, what's to stop a fly-by-night company from just selling cotton balls and salt as some kind of miracle cure, and or conversely, cutting corners and buying suboptimal medication from China and inadvertently poisoning people? Well,
I think the cotton ball salt thing is happening, right? You talked about the herbal stuff.
Yeah.
A good chunk of that is cotton ball and salt, basically. It does happen, and people do waste money on it. I think that there's an issue there, in that there's a way to handle that. I think that's better than the way that we do it. And this does not mean that there has to be no oversight of our food system. It just means I don't think that we need an entire department.
Or you can have some sort of quasi-voluntary agency. Like when I got a new car, I subscribed to Consumer Reports for a while.
Consumer Reports,
and I really like Consumer Reports. And if let's say in theory we got rid of the FDA tomorrow, and there's you could opt into Consumer Reports and have Consumer Report label on your medication that said, hey, Consumer Report says we won't kill you. I'll be like, great, I'm going to be buying those till I do my research. I'll just default on that.
And I think that's the alternative to what you were talking about when it comes to government collecting statistics and such, that I think there's a place there for private organizations to do that. We've seen there's great benefit to having statistical information going through the government. We saw this in Denmark just last week, where Denmark is like, they're like, you know what? No, there's no privacy here. We're taking every single piece. We were going to monitor your lives from birth to death. The great benefit of that approach, and it's not, it is at some point anonymous, but they had a study of every single child born for an entire decade, whether they took the MMR vaccine and whether they didn't, and they were able to find that there was no association whatsoever between autism, and they had 660,000 children. 660,000 children. They were able to know exactly who took it and who didn't. In fact, they found out 17% less chance of autism for the people who took the vaccine.
Really?
Which is incredible, right? And it's very invasive for American standards.
Yeah, I was about to say, can we outsource our stuff to Denmark and be like, hey, Denmark, we want to see what happens if you eat fries and smoke cigarettes? I don't know. I'm going to come up with some scenario here.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There is great benefit to that. In a really dark place, the great benefit to that there was great benefit to the Nazis, right? Because they were like, you know what? We don't care about human life, and let's test crap on everyone and see what happens. And so for so long, diseases and cures were named after individual Nazi doctors, which has finally started to change, thank God. But when you don't care about human life. There's amazing things you can do in the world of science, but it's one of those things where I think a private organization would have more respect for individual liberty than the government does in so many cases. And I think if you have look, there's other crimes associated here. Fraud is still a crime with no FDA. Right? Yeah. Poisoning people is still a crime with no FDA.
And I would argue that post hoc legal retribution is probably a stronger incentive than pre hoc preventative measures.
I think yes.
Post hoc being getting sued in court. I think companies are probably more concerned about lawsuits and stock prices than they are about FDA fines on the front end.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, look, it is. At some level, there is at least, if you're running, you've seen this before with, New York, where they have the A on the windows, and there's some, obviously, you get a B or a C, and people are just like, I don't want to go into that place, right? Like, there's just got to be rats everywhere. But so there is a preventative, I think, push. It's not completely ineffective, but I think the same thing would exist with Consumer Reports, right? If everyone was putting these things on the window, and you could easily look up on an app and find out where, okay, this place has not gone through inspection properly, you would probably avoid it. It's not the worst thing our government does, and I think to your approach. If it was cut down and there was some
you've more or less talked me into getting a spine.
Okay, good.
I think you've more or less brought me around to your position.
Right.
But I will say I'll finish up on this note. One of the things that I do see a problem with libertarianism with in general is I do think libertarianism tends to completely dismiss the emotional side of things.
Yes.
And I think oftentimes to the detriment of the policy that's trying to be enacted. So let's say there were a gun control law that was we're debating whether to do this law, and it's literally putting like a red sticker on every gun that says "Don't shoot innocent people." And like I look at that and you look at that and go, "This is a really dumb. This is not going to do anything." But like 400 or not 400 million Americans, but like 100 million Americans are like, "You got to pass this, or I'm going to like," and they're sweating. They're just sweating in bed, and I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like at that point, I do see a kind of utilitarian psychological toll from a non-invasive thing. So I see a role for that. But you've made a pretty good argument in terms of this sort of leaning against a rail which doesn't exist type phenomenon going on psychologically with the FDA. So for that reason, Stu, I hereby endorse you to become the next commissioner or director of the FDA, both commissioner director. And Stu Burguiere, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, a little bit before we wrap up, we'll do some listener feedback from iTunes. A Bupton of the Kenny Bunkport of Buptons says, Andrew's hilarious, conscientious, kind, and overall awesome. He doesn't play the us or them political game, but rather he digs deeper into the beliefs from people on all sides of any issue. The shoe reassures me that humanity and the United States are not as doomed as the mainstream media make it seem. Now I feel bad about correcting the grammar. That was such a lovely, lovely review. Thank you very much. That was very kind of you. Remember, you can always tweet me at Mighty Heaton or Facebook me at facebook.com/Mighty Heaton, or even email me by subscribing to my newsletter at mightyheaton.com and just replying when I send it out on Fridays. I did last Friday, and it was an awesome newsletter, and I got like 400 new people over the weekend. So beat the rush and become friends with me before I become a household name. I'd also like to encourage you to subscribe to Blaze TV and download the Blaze TV app. If you do, you can watch me instead of just listening to me. Use the promo code Heaton to get $10 off your annual Blaze TV subscription. So download the Blaze TV app on iTunes or Google Play, get subscribed to the Blaze, and then fall in love with me more than you already are. You can watch portions of the show on Facebook Watch by going to facebook.com/HeatonTV. Finally, please rate and review this podcast. That helps other people discover this here political orphanage. Thank you, and good day.